Okay, cue the socially distanced applause in your spare rooms and your home offices in Australia and all as far away as in New Zealand, as far as I can understand. Don't forget, we're coming to get the Bledisloe from you very soon. Now, can I begin by saying, I know the New Zealanders are now crying in their beer, but can I begin by saying what a remarkable job the trucking industry has done throughout the pandemic, keeping the arteries of our internal economy open. Now, someone should strike a medal, it seems to me, you can quote me on this, for all those drivers and companies that have made these great sacrifices to keep the rest of us fed and supplied with basic goods, and to allay the fears that led to panic buying and keep our retail and food and fuel sectors and building sectors open when they could have ended up on life support very easily. Time soon enough, I imagine, if you can still afford it, that is, for a national advertising campaign to explain to the general public the nature of those sacrifices and what the phrase essential industry actually means. We'll hear much more about that during today's Q&A, especially the difficulties of dealing with multiple sets of new and ever-changing rules around testing regimes and facilities and COVID protocols, and around border crossings and how to pass through virus hotspots, and how to do that and simultaneously access toilet facilities en route, something industry rightly describes as a basic human right, something which in the chaotic early days apparently didn't happen. So I have these terrible thoughts of truckies peeing into plastic bottles and desperately tried not to visualise their other bodily functions. Anyway, to underline the word essential in that phrase, essential industry, I was looking at some of the material that was sent to me to prepare for this, and they included figures for heavy vehicle traffic up and down the eastern seaboard. More than 4,000 border crossings a day on the Sydney-Melbourne route, over 3,000 on the New South Wales, Queensland coastal and inland routes, and these are figures for 7 years ago. So shut down a pipeline like that and we'd all be cactus, to put it mildly. So thank God that didn't happen, but there was a lot of confusion at the beginning, particularly in the early days and right up to a few months ago. So where are we now? We've had some experience in dealing with this. What are the key lessons that governments, state and federal, their health and transport regulators and the industry itself have all learned from dealing for the first time with a pandemic? Are we now in a position to do it better the next time? Do we have the right laws and safety procedures in place if we get second and third waves as they have in Europe and the United States? We've had some good news in the past 24 hours with some border crossings opening, New South Wales, South Australia, the extension of the Queensland bubble south, and it's a bit unclear as to exactly what that'll mean for truckies, although I do suspect, apart from extra traffic on the border crossings, things won't change a lot because you've already been operating through those borders for a long time. Now, I know that many of you will also have questions about other non-COVID related issues, and we'll certainly get to some of those, such as the controversial, some might say pernicious practice of extended payment times and reverse factoring. But we'll start with the biggest story, obviously, of the year, and we've got a very fine panel to take your questions. So let me introduce them. The Honourable Catherine King MP is a federal member for Ballarat and Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Gary Mahon is the Chief Executive Officer of the Queensland Trucking Association. Professor Catherine Bennett is Chair in Epidemiology at Deakin University, and during the pandemic has been a prolific contributor to the public debate. Brendan Richards is the National Sector Leader for Transport and Logistics at KPMG, and he'll be talking, I'm sure, about restructuring potential. Brendan, I've just mentioned him. Angela Welsh is the Director of the Straightshot Transport Company, and she's obviously been at the coalface of trucking across borders and all the rest of it, testing and so forth. So welcome to all of you, our panel. Again, cue spontaneous applause in your living rooms, etc. We're going to start with a video question from Shona Taylor.
Hi, I'm Shona Taylor from Main Freight. I have a question for Professor Bennett. My question today is, did we know enough soon enough to manage the virus well in Australia?
Okay, Catherine Bennett, we'll start with you. Did we know enough soon enough about the virus and how to deal with it?
It's always difficult when you have a new agent causing a pandemic. There's been a lot of conversation to date about how quickly information was released out of China, who were the first area to report the beginnings of this pandemic. But the reality is it took us a while to learn everything that we really did need to know about the basic epidemiology, as well as other aspects, including, the fatality rate, who were the vulnerable people in terms of risk of dying, as well as understanding what treatment options could be put in place to try and manage it. So it's hard to build that information. And I must say, credit to the world, we've done more in information sharing now. We've learned a lot from SARS in the past and other pandemics to really open up really good international communication around the science of this. Journals have made their articles online while they're still being peer reviewed, but also open access to the world. And there's been a lot of conversation happening everywhere. And in Australia as well, our response was to very early on establish the National Cabinet, which has actually allowed us to work cooperatively in ways that would otherwise be really difficult.
So, Catherine, we've all watched, obviously, the Victorian experience. It seems to be working, actually, and even the recent polling data is saying that Victorians, 2/3 of them at least, actually favour this hard lockdown. But are blanket lockdowns, is it clear now that blanket lockdowns, when you get a second wave or even a third wave, are they a good strategy?
Well, blanket lockdowns is really what you do when you don't quite know what you're hit with, what the consequences are, how the virus will move through your own community. So that's a natural first step. And I think it's worked well across all of Australia because it did, in fact, allow us to contain those first imported cases with some community transmission, but enough lockdown early enough to contain that and to actually arguably almost get us to a point of elimination, including Victoria. We don't see the same virus now that was circulating in the first wave. The second wave, we didn't quite get the same traction, bringing back in stage 3 lockdown. It was probably multiply seeded across different parts of the community. We went to lockdown, we added masks in. That really not only flattened the curve but turned it down. But a government decision quite soon after that to bring in stage 4, given the sheer number of cases and the concern about, the deaths associated with those cases as well, meant that we moved to more strict lockdown. So, there's been a lot of debate about whether we could have had a more nuanced approach and still achieved the same outcome, or whether we could have stayed with stage 3 and masks. But having achieved this now, we now are in a position across all eastern states to get that local transmission very low, and we may as well use that, unlike the rest of the world, which chose to open up, and even when they bring in restrictions now, it's a bit, the horse has bolted in a way.
Now, Catherine, I'm sorry to interrupt there. We're going to come back to you quite a bit during the discussion, talk about things like, what will happen when we get a vaccine, if we get a vaccine, and so forth. But just quickly on the trucking industry, been massive movement across the borders, even during lockdowns. And I think it is remarkable. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of transmission via truck drivers during this period. So do you give credit to the trucking industry throughout this period for having adopted the protection measures they have?
Absolutely. We know that truck drivers are at risk because they are moving through a number of regions and risk changes with the areas where you're working. We also know that some of the distribution centres have been hotspots in Melbourne. We've had outbreaks of over 100 in some of those centres where the drivers would be moving through as well. So clearly those rules around how to engage when you land, when you're in those distribution centres, and how you move through hotspots have really worked to both protect the drivers but also to protect states from more widespread movement of the virus with those transport workers. Just quickly, in Uganda, they've had a very different situation. They saw truck drivers as being quite central to their outbreak. 70% of local cases were reported to be truck drivers in the early stages of their current wave. And it's interesting because they think that's not even necessarily, it's probably reflecting the virus transmission in their communities back home, but because they're moving across borders into Uganda, they're bringing the virus with them. So that shows us what the risk could be. So it's absolutely a good story for, Trucking Australia, basically, to show that while they've had exposure, we haven't seen anything like that in Australia.
Yeah, let me bring Gary Mahon in. Obviously, Queensland's actually been at the forefront of dealing with this, maybe more successfully than the other states. You're from there. I know it's not a state of origin contest, but was it good management or good luck for the trucking industry that stopped the virus spreading through truck drivers?
I think it's very much good management on behalf of the industry. Right from the outset, industry operators stepped up straight away, from everything from hygiene management of their trucks, like the cleaning operations within the trucks and combinations, the carrying of PPE, the use of sanitisers and the like, wipes and all of those sorts of things that go with you might call personal hygiene, and then there was cabin hygiene. We then had self-isolation requirements, depots and yards and the like, fairly quickly into the COVID experience. And then early on, the breaking news, so to speak, from CHOs was a bit late in breaking, and we had to be very reactive in trying to manage what was necessary. And then over fairly quick time, through our established networks, through CHOs, through departments of main roads and many other elements to our networks within the states, we were able to negotiate not only more operationally practical solutions, but also have them in place in a more timely way. So with the combination of the way police have operationalised, the information feed from the CHOs and main roads departments, that negotiated somewhat solutions at times because they were listening to the operational practicalities. But on top of that, we were able to demonstrate, and an example from Queensland was the training and awareness video we developed. The adoption and use of that video was quite widespread quite early, and they were, I think, reassuring signs to authorities that the industry was taking this very seriously.
Let's hear from Angela Welsh. As I said, literally at the coalface with running a trucking company. I mean, it was very bad at the beginning, wasn't it, with massive border clog-ups and serious problems over when drivers should get tested, how often they should get tested, should they go into isolation, how long they should go into isolation after passing through a hot zone. So how difficult was it for you at the beginning, and were the problems resolved over time, do you think?
It was absolutely appalling at the beginning. There was so little information on what we could use, what was supposed to be put in place. Just from a personal point of view, I had a lot of contact with the associations, and if it wasn't for my contact with the associations, I don't know how I would have managed with my business. Trying to get everything in place that we possibly could, information.
They did a pretty fierce lobbying job, didn't they? I've seen some of the comments. You don't fix this, the trucking industry stops, tomorrow. Everything closes down, people won't be getting their goods and services, and the economy will stop. I mean, it was a pretty hard argument, well fought.
It was absolutely incredible. We had, without any disrespect to the regulator, the information that came out very quickly, and kudos to Gary Mahon and the QTA with their training system. It was brilliant. It was just so much to do. When you have got a small business, there's just an innumerable amount of things that you have to try and address to start with, and then you have this on top of it, and it just made it a nightmare. We've had issues on the borders. I know Gary said there's been great communications with police, with everybody else involved, but those on the coalface, they know a very different story.
Let's hear from Catherine King. How do you reckon your political colleagues, state and federal, have handled this?
Well, I think that what you've seen is really symptomatic of the Federation. we've been worried about pandemics for a long time, but we clearly weren't as well prepared as we could have or should have been. I think at the end of the day, in the Commonwealth Department of Health, there was only a couple of people who were in the section that's responsible for dealing with these issues. And how fabulous has it been that we've got all these amazing epidemiologists and public health people, of which we have a very strong history in this country, who have absolutely stepped to the fore. But I think we weren't prepared. I think, it's always hard to say, is every single thing going to work perfectly? Of course it's not in some, crisis like this, but it's clear that we've seen the sort of fracture lines in the Federation, and the trucking industry has sort of borne the brunt of some of that because it's been the industry that's needed desperately. It has to cross borders in order to do its job as an essential service, and we've seen that occur. So I think that's really, one of the lessons out of this. The National Cabinet's, it started off okay, but I think you can really see that at the end of the day, it has been states and territories making decisions, on occasion being able to agree and get, solve problems, but really it hasn't been a national unified approach. And I think that's really, the challenge for us going forward. It's why we've advocated pretty strongly for a Centre for Disease Control in Australia, but one that is integrally, as part of the, Commonwealth Department of Health and the public health systems of each of the states and territories. It's that working with transport departments, it's really going to help us prepare a lot better for, God forbid, if this ever happens to us again.
Okay, let's hear from Brendan Richardson. Brendan, there are opportunities in a crisis for restructuring. Is there a need for it within the industry? I mean, the industry responded quickly. The associations obviously have responded powerfully with strong arguments and solved some of the ongoing problems that started at the beginning and took months really to resolve some of them. But what about the industry itself? Does it need to have another look at itself, how it's structured as a result of the pandemic?
Well, one of the things, Tony, that is very difficult about the industry is that it's a heavily capital-intensive pursuit, and one that yields a relatively low net profit outcome for businesses. So when we look at how the industry has stepped up, as it absolutely has done on the back of COVID, we need to remember that it hasn't just stepped up in terms of keeping the wheels moving, keeping the freight flowing, but it's done so at significant cost to the operators in the sector, not just in terms of disruption, but in terms of investment in PPE, in COVID safe plans, etc. So it's added significantly to the cost base of those businesses that have stepped up and really done their part to keep Australia moving. In terms of the broader challenges that face the industry, look, this is an industry that's massively fragmented. It always has been. There's an enormous number of participants in it, the order of 50,000 or something like that. The top three hold sort of 12, 13% of the market or thereabouts. Enormously competitive and a great tendency for businesses to keep their wheels turning, to take on work contracts, opportunities at less and less margin and value each time. When you combine that with the capital intensity of the industry and the time over which you lock in your finance commitments, so typically plant and equipment, trucks, trailers, that sort of thing, sort of on a 5-year type basis, and then properties over a 20-year basis. The challenge becomes how do you maintain a profitable business where you can take on commitments of that long and yet remain nimble enough to pivot towards new opportunities or to protect yourself from things that come out of nowhere, such as COVID, and ensure that your investment in that business is safe.
Brendan, I'm going to interrupt you there for a moment because we're going to come back to some of those issues in a minute. We've got a very good video question specifically about that. But I'm just going to make a quick call out to those of you who are watching out, as I say, in your cupboards or your spare rooms or your home offices. newspapers, whatever, you can actually submit questions via the broadcast site. Go ahead and do that. They'll come up on a screen in front of me and I'll be able to ask them directly. We've got a question that's just coming in fact. It's from Julie Broadbent. We're talking about the differences in rules at borders simply don't pass the pub test, hence the apathy towards government in that public space. Let's go to Gary to respond to that. And looking back, there's vast numbers of trucks going over the borders. It is an absolute phenomenon, it seems to me, in a way akin to the Berlin airlift in some ways. The trucking industry has been able during a pandemic to keep this going. But what about those border controls and the inconsistency from state to state? Who did it best? What's the model?
Oh, I think I should be very careful about who I give a gold medal to, but because I might be seen as being a bit too complimentary to my own state. But it's fair to say there's been a lot of inconsistency at the borders, and certainly one of the jobs of associations has been to interpret all of those data feeds, you might call them, or information sources, and give our drivers and or employers the best possible information to be able to transit across the country in as seamless a way as we possibly can. I think now that we're 5-6 months in, one of the big lessons to take away from this in a review is to reach some agreement that surely things like border passes could be consistent at every border. Surely the duration of permits could be consistent at every border. Now, there may well be an argument from individual CHOs about specific circumstances in given states, and there might need to be some different health rules around those states, but elements like consistency of border pass, duration of those passes, truck-friendly testing arrangements. So we did negotiate for decent drive-through arrangements here in Queensland. They were exceptional in terms of providing a decent service and an accessible service for our drivers.
Gary, you mentioned that worked well in Queensland, not so well in other places. I mean, should that have been a national priority? Should the Cabinet have stepped in, allocated a fund of money to set up testing facilities everywhere, maybe staff them with military personnel?
Well, I think Catherine King's comments were very valid. I mean, there is a national cabinet process. From my observation, I think that certainly improved the conversation between respective premiers and the Prime Minister. But in terms of its function, it didn't bring about consistency at those respective state borders. And those are certainly lessons we need to learn if and when we ever have something like this type of circumstance again, or for other not foreseeable circumstances that might befall us in the next, 5 or 10 years.
Angela, just talk to us about that, will you, and what it was like. I mean, the testing arrangements for truck drivers changed from time to time. Initially, there was an expectation if you passed through Victoria, you'd have to self-isolate for 2 weeks, and then the testing regime changed from state to state. How did you actually deal with that? I mean, I know the association was putting out bulletins, this has changed, keeping you abreast of it, but how do you deal with that when you've got truckies on the road heading for borders and not knowing whether they're going to get through?
It was absolutely atrocious, as I've said before. You've got drivers who are on the road. I heard of one incident where one driver was turned back from the border. He had to go back 200 kilometres to go and get a printed copy of the border pass, to then drive back 200 kilometres and still not get through because of another issue that they decided to pick up at the time. That sort of, I can't even think of a polite word to use right now in regards to the way some of the borders were actually managed, the lack of knowledge, the lack of ability to listen to what the drivers are saying and identifying what the law and the requirements were for going past the borders. It was a nightmare. We're talking about very thin margins. And when people are having to drive an extra 400 kilometres for a piece of paper, that was one of the most appalling situations. We've got drivers that haven't seen their own families or been able to hug their own families for weeks on end because in some places you've got to self-isolate. You're not allowed to go and be with your families, because then you might be able to go into another state again. It's been absolutely horrendous on the poor drivers.
Let me go to Catherine Bennett. Horrendous, and from a scientific point of view, would you say necessary, or was it an overreaction? Was it the chaos at the beginning? Was it? Can it be fixed in the future? And I mean, is there a problem when scientists give to governments specific health warnings, and then it translates into very strict rules that don't account for the fact that freight has to travel across borders, for example?
There's about 13 questions in there, and I think...
Sorry about that. We can find it to one. Did scientists get their advice right to governments about border crossings?
Yeah. Well, actually, the bigger question, I think, comes to the very important word used just previously by one of my panel members was review and evaluation. At the start, we didn't know, and we were still learning and trying to put in, the protection that seemed reasonable. The fact that we couldn't do it in a coordinated way to create, a seamless system across borders was something we need to avoid going ahead. I don't think that means you work to the lowest common denominator either. I wouldn't want to see the strictest restrictions applied at every border just because some need it. We have to find a happy medium. It also ties to industry standards. So being COVID safe now, I think, would give people a lot more assurance about the way drivers can move through hot zones without actually having a risk of loading the virus on the truck with them. And that then gives you more options in terms of state borders. So I think going ahead, we have to absolutely evaluate what went on. We need to look at our data in a lot more detail than we've had time to do, particularly in Victoria. We've got large numbers, but we can look at cases by occupation and get a better understanding of where risk might still have been and not necessarily packaged as an outbreak, but still might be there, to really understand what models worked at different times, what were those operating, feasible border controls we could put in place that could also give us the protection going ahead. So we have to learn from this, and we have to do it better next time.
Catherine King, sorry, Catherine, I'll let you continue. Catherine Bennett, sorry.
No, I was just going to say scientists provide advice, but, it does meet politics in the middle. You do end up, with policy decisions that are taking information from a whole series of quarters. But I think there has to be a really good evidence-based approach to evaluating this so that we get the best planning going ahead. As Catherine said, we thought we were ready for pandemics, but we're still learning so much through this experience. That we'll be in a much better place ahead.
Actually, I'm just, Catherine King, do you feel a little bit of bipartisan support here for the federal coalition government? I mean, the Cabinet did bring down protocols reasonably quickly. They weren't adopted state to state because of the issues that we talked about with different state laws and legislations. I mean, if you got into government, would you do it much differently, or do you think they pretty much handle it as you would have in government?
Well, I think that, we need, whilst Victoria is still grappling and, has done an amazing job, I'd have to say, getting these numbers down in the amount of time that we have, I think that, we should be starting planning for the next pandemic now. And learning from what has happened, and whether it is freight and logistics and how goods are transported across the country, right the way through to how our health system has managed this, how do we share information, all of that. There is a lot of work to be done, and that needs to be resourced. It needs to be resourced at the federal level and resourced at the state and territory level. A lot of this is about relationships as well. Whilst the Council of Australian Governments is now defunct, there is a lot of confusion about what is its replacement actually going to be in terms of transport ministers and how all of that is going to work, and how do we get those mechanisms into a place where people of goodwill who have built relationships through this pandemic can try and solve some of these problems. And a lot of this is endemic between government departments and between different states, but we've learnt a lot in the process. We should capitalise on that and be working on it right now.
Thanks, Catherine. I've got a comment come in from Klaus Schmidt. This is to Gary. Are there any practices adopted by the industry that have come from the COVID pandemic that you believe will stay as they are and I presume that means stay after the pandemic is over, hopefully that will happen, will stay as they are good for the industry. Gary.
Oh yes, I think there's a couple of standout things. One is contactless delivery. So that technology has been around for some time, but it's been adopted like Zoom and Teams and a few other things. They're not new technologies, but they've been adopted considerably more rapidly in the last little while. So I think generally speaking, that contactless delivery and some of the flow-on effects that's had to logistics in the pick and pack sort of back end of the logistics chain has improved markedly, and I think will make quite a difference.
Yeah, just very briefly on that, do you reckon the industry is going to end up employing fewer people, particularly at storage facilities, as everything becomes more automated and remote?
Well, it may well be in the logistics end, but certainly with trucks, you're talking about 26% growth over the next 5 years. It's been growing at that sort of rate over the last 5 years, and there's some fairly long-range projections that suggest it's anywhere between 30 and 50% over the next 15 years. So you're still going to need trucks to deliver that product. Even if you migrate a certain amount of that freight to the rail, you still need trucks to get it to the rail, to get it from the rail to delivery. And with time-sensitive freight, trucks will always take the lead in terms of the delivery of that product across the country. So there may well be impacts from automation and other design characteristics around the trucking task, but I think for the next 15 to 30 years, you're still going to see a reasonable increase in the number of trucks on the road. Okay. There is another argument about productivity.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, there's another argument about productivity and the use of more effective combinations so that we can do a growing freight task with a lesser number of truck trips at a safer performance.
Okay, we've got a video from Andrew Haji-Kakao. It's to Brendan Richards.
G'day Brendan, it's Andrew Haji-Kaku from PACCAR Australia. I have a question for you. Do you see any clear opportunities for transport businesses to prepare themselves in the future post-coronavirus?
Okay, Brendan, that is effectively the question that I sort of cut you off from answering before because I knew we had that coming, so off you go.
Look, I think there's, I think the issues or the opportunities for the sector post-coronavirus really aren't necessarily distinctly different to what they were pre-coronavirus, and that is that we do have an issue with the sector broadly, and there's always exceptions to this, but we do have an issue that it is a critical fundamental sector that supports the Australian economy that does not make enough of a return for the capital employed in that sector. That's fundamentally the issue, and you have people come and go from the industry all the time as a consequence of that. Now, the reason for that is probably not dissimilar to many other industries, and that is that the task of moving freight around is primarily perceived as being transactional in nature. And so long as we continue in the industry to provide a transactional service, we will struggle to increase our relevance to our customers over time. And ultimately, it's relevance that we provide to our customers that locks us in for the long term, and being locked in for the long term comes at a premium. And that's where we can ultimately claw out slightly better margins, get a better return on invested capital, and so on. So the question then becomes, well, how do you increase your relevance to your client base? It really is about skills and about mindset, and the opportunity for the sector, for businesses who run trucking companies in particular, is to build themselves more deeply into the supply chain of their customers, so that they become more sticky and less easily displaced by their customers over time. Now, to do that, you need to bring something additional to how those customers manage their supply chains. And to do that requires typically skill sets that don't necessarily reside in trucking or transport operations, particularly in the mid and lower market at the moment. That then comes back to investment. What do you invest in for the future of your business? Should you be investing in growing your fleet of trucks based on new opportunities as they present, but doubling down on the transactional nature of your business? Or should you be investing in bringing skills and capabilities into your business that develops you out as more of a supply chain management and consulting business that can then bring the support to that capability with a trucking fleet and so on.
Well, Brendan, I'm going to interrupt you there because I'd like to hear from Angela on whether she agrees that she may need to actually change the way she operates in a post-pandemic world. Angela, listening to what Brendan's saying, do you think there's a need to change the way you do business, the style of your business?
I'm actually going to say we've already done that. We are an extremely small business. We've got some incredible customers, and we've actually managed to get even more customers through the pandemic, just through having the proper systems in place to make sure that we can get through. The customers are confident that we can get through the borders. They know what we're doing. They know what we're talking about. We know what we're talking about, and we've grown, thankfully, throughout this pandemic. So yes, I think we all need to adopt.
Very good. Let's hear from Catherine Bennett, using your expertise on the virus. Do you see opportunities for transport business to prepare themselves better for a possible second or third waves of the virus? I'm not talking in a business sense, as Brendan was talking about, but generally.
Yeah, I do think there's going to be a lot of legacy from this that I think will be good. It's not just, using Zoom and contactless delivery. I think there's a whole range of things that we think about that will not only prepare us and set us up better to face future pandemics, but also actually will reduce risk of illness in our workplaces. Colds and flus will go down if we keep these distancing and hygiene and mask wearing up going ahead, in places where we're actually at risk. So I do see some really, good benefits of this as we re-engineer our workplaces and our operating procedures to both respond to this, but actually come to this new normal, so that we are protected going ahead. But we also have the benefit of prevention then, and I think that's something that will benefit us and allow us to stop saying new normal or COVID normal and actually just make that our normal.
I have to say, Catherine, that with the new normal of mask wearing, the only time I feel really bad is when I walk into a bank. Luckily, however, the teller's usually wearing masks as well, so I feel a bit relieved at that point. But let me ask you this, what about a vaccine or vaccines when they finally arrive? Should truck drivers be on the top of the list of essential workers along with health workers to get first vaccinations?
Yeah, look, I think we've made an argument to say that truck drivers aren't vectors as far as we can see in a major way, but there is still a risk. And given the way it impacts operation and I guess the feasibility of operation with border checks and all the rest, then it would be, I think, a group that would have an argument to go to the top of the list. We know we won't know exactly that we've got a vaccine until we have it in our hand, and we also don't know whether it be one or more and what the efficacy will be. So not everyone who gets a vaccine necessarily mounts an immune response to protect them, and we also know we may not get the vaccine out to the whole community as well. So those two things will work together to tell us how much, whether we A, have a vaccine, and B, how much we will be protected by it. But hopefully it will eventuate. It will be enough to provide herd immunity, and I think those people that are moving across borders and across the country, should be a priority group. And
just on that, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say the other thing, they talk about syndemics, so where you have a number of things coming together, and I know someone from the trucking industry in Perth has raised this, but some of the drivers who are in the age groups that are in the more vulnerable age group, it's when you start to bring those risk factors together along with a risky nature of the work, if you like, in terms of exposure, and then add to that movement across the country, those three things would actually be part of this argument, I think, around priority listing for vaccine.
Just a very quick response, Catherine, on this. And when the vaccine comes, we shouldn't think about it as it sounds from what you're saying, we shouldn't think about it as a magic bullet that's immediately going to open up our borders free of any restrictions and free of testing and so forth.
It will take a while to roll out and to understand, what that means in terms of risk. And we are also still learning whether or not the virus will beat the vaccine. And we know it is evolving. Hopefully, science is still positive that it won't evolve enough that the vaccine is no longer effective. But we won't really know it, and it will depend which vaccines come into play. So all those things mean that we probably have to think ahead about living with this virus for some time to come, and maybe even beyond that if the vaccine isn't the magic bullet, as you say.
I'm just quickly going to Gary for a response on the vaccine issue. Would you expect all truck drivers to put their hand up, or even trucking companies to make it compulsory for their drivers to get vaccinated once the vaccination comes? I'm seeing Angela's shaking her head there, so I'm going to come back to her in a moment. But Gary first.
I don't know that they necessarily would, but certainly I would like to take the opportunity to point this out, which I don't think has been acknowledged very well, if all that much at all. And that is the sustained pressure on our drivers moving across borders on a continuous basis. You're looking at someone who's going into transport yards and being self-isolated, so no contact with anybody. They're out on the highways and byways where they have to remain relatively isolated from where they take rest or they eat or sleep or whatever the case may be. They come back home and they have to remain isolated fundamentally from their communities. So you've got people who are not attending, the football with their sons or the netball with their daughters or whatever the case may be. They've got to remain relatively in a bubble, for want of a better expression. When you look at that sustained pressure over months and months and months, I don't think that has been very well acknowledged, even though we've tried to raise it on any number of occasions and in different ways. And it is a valuable lesson that needs to be considered for any further events of this type of nature, is how do you better manage or mitigate that pressure for our drivers who are undertaking that vital, essential task. Because as individuals, they are very much put in a bubble, and it is a sustained bubble for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a salutary point that needs to be taken away in any review.
No, I wasn't kidding when I suggested they should strike a medal for these drivers, and maybe for some of the company owners as well. And let's hear from Angela Welsh, who's in that category. I saw you shaking your head when you were hearing about the vaccine. What are your thoughts?
I have always been a massive supporter of vaccines. However, I refuse to accept that it should ever be mandatory. There are so many reasons different people do and don't want to have their vaccines, and that should be their choice only. And just as a point of interest, I know that during the COVID pandemic, there's actually been changes in the legislation in Victoria whereby people in aged care are no longer required to have their flu vaccines. And this is something that changed during this current COVID pandemic. There's reasons for that, and it should never, ever be made mandatory that the vaccinations need to be given to people.
Let me quickly hear from Catherine King on that. We've got a video question coming up for you, Catherine, as well. It's on a different subject. But just on that vaccine question, do you think it will inevitably be mandatory for the population, particularly for essential workers?
Look, any medical intervention and vaccine is as such, individual choice still comes to play. But what you're seeing both federally and state is then, where people are in high risk areas where vaccination is critical to protecting more broadly a vulnerable population, that often that is linked. And so it's linked to being able to access childcare payments, or it's linked to being able to access employment in aged care facilities. The reason that mandatory flu vaccination was brought in for aged care workers was because of the very, very significant vulnerabilities. And I think particularly given there is so much misinformation out there about vaccines and the effects of vaccines, I think it is really, really important that governments continue to encourage people and employers continue to encourage people to get vaccinated, because we do need, the vaccine, any vaccine, whether it's coronavirus when or if we get one, or flu vaccine or measles, is only as effective as that level of herd immunity. And we don't get herd immunity if we get whole groups of populations, particularly working with vulnerable people or who may spread because of their movement across the country. If we get whole groups of people who buy into some of the mythology that, frankly, during this coronavirus, that has, it's been very fertile soil for a whole lot of conspiracy theories, which are frankly just absolute rubbish.
Yeah, actually, I should go back to Catherine Bennett quickly on that question, and for a brief answer, if you wouldn't mind. Will the vaccination, or should the vaccination process, once it comes, if it's seen to be a safe vaccine, and you obviously wouldn't distribute it if not, should it be compulsory across the population, and particularly across essential workers?
Look, I absolutely agree with everything Catherine just said. I think it may be linked to particular high-risk work, and so it might be tied to that. But we haven't had to go to mandatory vaccination before, and I'm hoping that people's good sense and access to the right and correct information, as well as a safe vaccine, because Australia won't compromise safety, will be enough for us to achieve the levels of vaccination that we want. But it may still be something we have to tie to, to working in certain sectors where there is both high risk to individual, but also to those they're working with.
Okay, we've got another video question from Sally Tipping, and it's to Catherine King. Okay, well, I'm not hearing that. I don't know about the rest of us. I can probably best if I read that one out. So the question from Sally Tipping is, oh, here it comes. Try again. Nope. I'll read it out. Is funding for heavy vehicle rest areas high on the agenda, considering a well-rested truckie leads to safer, calmer roads? Catherine, and bear in mind too that right in the beginning of this, and for quite a long period of time, there was terrible confusion about where truck drivers could actually not only rest but use toilet facilities and so forth.
Yep, absolutely. It has to be. I think if there's, we're going to see a budget in a few weeks' time. I'm actually in quarantine at the moment myself in Canberra, pending being able to get to the budget session in Parliament. There's talk about a big infrastructure spend. If you're going to build roads, you've got to build in rest stops. It's ridiculous. We should be building far more of those. They're not that expensive and they're quick to build, so it's a great investment in getting money out into the economy, but also making sure we have more rest areas for transport workers to be able to actually do their jobs safely. I think that, I hope to see some more and stronger investment in that area. I think, it was very good, and a number of truck drivers contacted Labor right at the start of this about the issue with rest areas, and I think making a bit of noise about that actually helped. It didn't make it perfect, but I think being able to, voice those issues, I think again has just shown, our definition and understanding of what's an essential worker has changed dramatically in this country, and essential workers, wherever they are, need to be able to rest to do their jobs properly.
Yeah, I'd quickly go back to Gary on that, because you guys were at the coalface. I mentioned earlier the lobbying that went on, and it was pretty fierce, and it was effective. But have you got everything you wanted for truck drivers?
In a general sense, we're able to have a reasonable level of wins across the board to look after the industry and look after drivers. The investment in things like rest areas is yet to come. There are some investments occurring around the country, but we could do with quite a few more, and most importantly, be well placed. We need to have a pattern of rest areas across the country, we always appreciate any being built, but we prefer them not to be so much ad hoc, but actually establish a pattern.
Gary, I'm going to interrupt you there, because Mike Williams just sent us in a question that seems relevant to what you're saying. Why is there no standard for rest areas or road repairs?
Well, that's a respective question for each of the states. There are a lot of standards around road building, everything from pavements to the quality of seals to bridge building standards and the like, but there's no rest area standard that I'm aware of. That's up to each respective state as they build them. Some rest areas are built what I would call more opportunistically, where they might utilise a previous section of alignment that's been replaced or something like that. whereas in other cases they are quite purpose-built. I think most drivers would suggest they need a good, safe area that with drive-through parking with toilets and water as a good basic start. They're not asking for anything beyond that in many respects. When you start adding lighting and other amenities, that's great too. But as a basic standard, drive-through parking, safe ingress and egress with toilets and water is an essential ingredient to get underway.
Okay, we've got another video. This one, again, it's to Catherine King, but everyone will want to comment on it. It's off the topic of the pandemic. Jeff Crouch has sent this video.
Good afternoon, panel. My name is Jeff Crouch. My question is for Shadow Minister Catherine King. Long payment terms seem to be becoming the norm rather than the exception in 2020 and have been that way for many years. It's now not unusual to see payment terms of 90 or even 120 days and sometimes more. An increasing number of clients are mandating these excessive payment terms, although sometimes they will offer to pay quicker, but only if you pay using a certain mandated credit card that they will offer through a financial institution that they have a relationship with. And of course, no, we're not allowed to add a fee to cover the extra charges we have to pay by receiving payment by credit card. My question to you, Catherine, is what are your thoughts on this practice, which is becoming more onerous and more prevalent, and what do you think can and should be done about it?
Catherine King,
Thanks very much for the question. Jeff's raised this with me a few times before as well. Look, we tried, I think recently there was a bill through the Parliament in terms of payment terms, and we did try and get some amendments around ensuring that we have better surety of payment times to 30 days for small businesses. We weren't able to get that through, but I think again, you know, we're seeing through not just through this pandemic, but what's been happening with small to medium enterprises, that payment terms are actually pretty critical. And I know Brendan O'Connor, who's had some responsibility in this area for a while, tried pretty hard to get some changes in this space, and I think the Australian Trucking Association supported what we were trying to do. We just couldn't manage quite to get it through the Parliament. So I think just keep watching this space. We'll keep trying. Whether it's from opposition and hopefully one day in government.
Yeah, Catherine, is there something, I mean, I was unfamiliar with this practice, but it sounds kind of pernicious to my mind, that a company is meant to be paying in 30 days could end up extending the payment to 90 days and then offering some sort of credit facility for which undoubtedly they get a profit. That's unfair business practice, is it not? Just tell me that I'm wrong. I don't understand it entirely. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, if it's not unfair business practice, it certainly feels very unethical business practice as well. If someone's profiting from delaying payment to someone who's waiting for that payment so that they can, you know, pay their workers and pay down their debt, you know, for the capital investments that they've made. And it's certainly, you know, something I think the ACCC's looked at various points in time. But I think unless you legislate some sort of fail-safe mechanism into the payments legislation, you know, you're going to see all sorts of people exploiting these sort of loopholes, and at the moment, you know, it's not illegal for people to do it, but it's certainly unethical.
Yeah, Angela, have you come across this and had to deal with the you know, slow or delayed payments, and have you been offered kind of credit facilities from companies that are supposed to be paying you?
My short answer is no. We just won't do it. We've got a couple of customers now that have pushed it out. Ours are generally 7 days. We work with a lot of business. We are tiny, and I'm not going to beat around the bush about it. We're tiny, but we've got some businesses who have just decided, nah, Corona, yeah, no, we're not going to pay you for 6 weeks regardless. So yeah, you'll just have to wait for it. And if you don't like it, then too bad. Ours are generally 7 days, and if they're not paid within a reasonable time, I have no worries whatsoever to just start the processes to go through court. Now, with those larger end bills, we don't get to that level.
Yeah, let's hear from Gary. This reverse factoring, as it's called, was news to me. Are you familiar with it? And what are your thoughts about it?
I'm aware that it's certainly being exercised by some of the larger clients. We've also had members approach during this period seeking discounts from clients where they're saying on the elevated volumes, we expect you to discount your rates. Well, you know, it's no cheaper to carry through COVID than any other time. So but I think that's a reflection generally of, you know, commercial practice and the way the market works from time to time. We're not aware of any undue push at this point in time with reverse factoring, but we are aware that there are a couple of larger clients have been exploring that avenue a little more, and we'll keep a watchful eye on that. But at this stage, I think generally speaking, we are comfortable with the notion of 30 days and that should be pushed pretty hard through legislative means, statutes, whether they be at federal or state level, so that, you know, our industry has got every opportunity to trade in a reasonable and practicable way.
Fair enough. We've got a final question here. We're running out of time. We've got a couple of minutes left, so brief answers from everyone. It's a question from Rod Hannafy. It's come in. How can we change public and business perception? Have they been educated about? Have the people been educated about sharing the road with us? And how do we get them to recognise road transport's contribution to their way of life? Now, it might seem a bit unfair, but I'll start with Catherine Bennett. Brief answer. Are you prepared to sort of, as a scientist, say, oh, well, this industry's done very well and get that message out to the public?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I do think, like epidemiologists, our transport workers are probably more visible in this pandemic. There's less other cars on the road, but we know how important it is to keep the supply chains up. And that's about food security, food safety, all of those other things that have been high profile as well. So I do think there has been good profile, and I'll definitely have this in my mind as we're looking to evaluate data and highlight what we did well so we can learn from that going ahead.
Very good. You reminded me that we should be casting medals for epidemiologists as well as truck drivers and other essential workers. Anyway, let's hear from Brendan on this one.
Look, I think you probably covered it in your opening remarks, Tony, and that is that it's a sector that has stepped up enormously. People in the industry do deserve a medal, and there's probably the basis of a really good campaign to bring to the consciousness of the general population the contribution the sector makes to society. It typically is only reported when something doesn't go to plan, as opposed to when things are delivered seamlessly and efficiently, and I think much more can be made of that.
We're nearly out of time. Let's hear finally. Got 15, 20 seconds. Angela.
Yeah, look, take that just a little bit further. When we have a look at our statistics, we've got 80% of the serious collisions involving heavy vehicles are not the fault of the truck driver. Most people in society don't even know that. Yes, we have smaller collisions where the stats are slightly different, but when we're looking at 80% is the fault of the smaller or the other vehicle involved, whether it be pedestrian and or motorcycle, car, whatever the case may be, we need to start getting the message out and letting people know that we need to all share the roads and we have different needs when we're on those roads.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, and a huge round of socially distanced applause coming from right out there in cyberspace for our wonderful panel, Catherine King, Gary Mahon, Professor Catherine Bennett, Brendan Richards and Angela Welsh. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all from me. I'll throw you back to the rest of the team.
truth from the sky to the ocean. I know I'd scare you.